Into the Labyrinth, Chapter 5, The Way Out. I want to come back to consider the labyrinth itself as a physical structure. In the story involving Daedalus and Theseus and the Minotaur, the labyrinth is depicted as this multi-cursal, many-branched, dead-ended, convoluted structure, similar to an underground cave. But as early as 400 or 500 BCE in Crete and other parts of Greece, another design started to emerge of a one-way unicursal labyrinth. It was used on coins and other things. This image continued into the Roman Empire, and Christianity adopted a form of this design. In the Middle Ages, unicursal, as in one way, labyrinths began appearing on the floors of cathedrals, so worshippers could follow the path to the center and then back out. In this style of labyrinth, there's no way to deviate, but it's not a linear route. You have to go through every twist and turn to get to the center, rounding corners again and again to go through each separate quadrant. And once you make it to the center, there's nowhere to go but out the way you came, retracing your steps to the beginning. Thus, walking the labyrinth becomes transformed into a meditative and contemplative act, a slow journey in which there is no choice but to take time to reflect while you're going in and going out. If you've ever walked a unicursal labyrinth on a church floor, or the one I walked outside on a cliff overlooking the ocean at Land's End in San Francisco, if you're not within a walled structure or a hedge maze where the view is obstructed, you can look down and see the entire path laid out before you as you follow it. You can see how close you are to the center, and then you turn the curve and the path takes you all the way out to the edge before you enter another quadrant. And I had this feeling, how can I be so close yet so far at the same time? And there was nothing I could do except keep going. So what is at the center? It might seem anticlimactic to think that after following such a long spiraling path, the only thing one finds at the center is the core of oneself. A journey of just going further and further inside, withdrawing from the world, a vision of selfishness, and by definition, self-centeredness. But there are those who would argue that the center of the labyrinth, and in fact, at the center of myself or any other person, is the presence of the divine that is within us all. You don't necessarily have to use the word God, singular or plural, masculine or feminine. It could be any name you use to try to describe what is ultimately indescribable. Spirit, source, the universe, a higher power, love with a capital L, or whatever you prefer. The journey is to the center place inside you, past the convoluted twists and turns we make of our own lives, all the long and winding dramas we get ourselves caught up in. Once you get through all that, you're at the quiet, still place in the center, an empty place where the light of divine wisdom can shine and give guidance without all the distractions and nonsense of everyday life. Paradoxically, even though one cannot stay in this center forever, unless one has dedicated a life to spiritual solitude, which I'm often tempted to do, the center is always inside you, and it's always available if you are willing to do the work of mindfully traveling within to reach it. Now, unlike the one that Daedalus built to hide the Minotaur, you can't really get lost in a labyrinth of this design, but you can't take any shortcuts either, not if you're doing it right. I do imagine, though, that one could get stuck, or at least that's how I felt at times, that I've curled myself up and tucked myself away in one of these little corners. Whether it's on my way into or out of the center, I lose track. I'm so caught up in whatever's going on outside or somewhere in all the layers of my inner self-doubt that I can't bring myself to move in any direction or even tell which way is forward or backward. And sometimes I'm just stalling as I approach a corner I don't want to turn yet, pacing in place rather than moving in any direction. So the labyrinth of my inner world becomes a good place to hide. There are times I feel very much like the architect, who's too clever for his own good, and that I myself created these internal structures I get lost inside. After all these years that I've been reflecting on various myths, and in turn using them to mythologize my own life, I wonder to what extent I've been romanticizing my problems instead of actually dealing with them. And that at the end of the day, I'm not any closer to God or divine wisdom. I've just lost myself staring in the mirror, and that's what's keeping me trapped. I'm not only the architect, I'm the labyrinth too. Along these lines, it's hardly surprising that given my self-dramatization and my bouts of melancholy and hopelessness and being in love with my own suffering, once upon a time I created a dissertation research project that involved using mythology as a tool for introspection. Of course, I was really doubting this. I think the whole point of me having this project was having something I could fall in and out of love with and experience highs and lows about, and create a labyrinth that I both loved and hated, which is what it became. I remember sitting in the office as someone on my dissertation committee and complaining, because that's all I did was complain. I said, what if it's all a lie? What if you go into the labyrinth of yourself to think of all your issues, and you just get stuck there and you never come out? And he looks at me, and he says something like, that's what an archetype is. Your problem is you think it's your labyrinth, but really, it's a labyrinth. This isn't your problem, it's a human problem. Once you realize that, you can get out of it, and then maybe you can actually help some people. That blew my mind a little bit. I'm playing a little fast and loose with the word archetype here. I realize it's up for debate whether there are truly universal images or motifs that occur across every culture and time period, and I don't think anyone can ever really know. But what my committee member said has stuck with me ever since. It was this realization that what I'm going through, I'm not the only one who's gone through it. Whether it's joy or despair, anger, lust, greed, grief, or frustration, someone else has experienced this, maybe even for some of the same reasons. Remembering this can help me pull my head out of my ass or look up from my navel sometimes. And I don't know how to say it with any words that could be more eloquent than what Wendy Doniger wrote in Other People's Myths. She says, the private mythic moment is crowded by ghosts whom we cannot identify consciously, but whose multiplicity we are aware of. We know what is happening to us has happened to them, because we have heard stories about them, and so they are present with us when those things happen to us. This is what great myths are. The stories that people all over the world have come to trust with their darkest and most deeply troubling insights. In this case, I think the structure of the labyrinth and all the stories constellated around it give insight into how to handle these kinds of human problems. It's possible that my labyrinth could look similar to someone else's. My drama, my monsters, my shadows, and my heroes may not be that different from yours. Maybe we're all looking for a thread, and maybe for some of us that thread got tangled up somewhere. But I do believe it's possible to find a way out, if that's what you really want, and you're ready to make the journey. On that note, I want to start wrapping up this episode and come back to a part of the story that I've been saving. I want to exit the story the way we entered, which seems fitting for the labyrinth. So let's return to Daedalus. After Icarus dies, Daedalus continues flying to Sicily, with the wings that he made, and he asks for the protection from the king there. But King Minos from Crete is still on his trail and has created a plan to find Daedalus. He goes from village to village, and he has set up this challenge, and he asks if is there anyone there who can string a piece of thread through a spiral seashell? So when he comes to Sicily, where Daedalus is in hiding, Daedalus comes out to answer the challenge. Daedalus attaches a piece of string to an ant and pours a trail of honey inside the shell. The ant is able to crawl through the shell with the string attached and make it to the center. And in this way, he's able to thread the spiral shell. So King Minos is like, I know who this is. You're not fooling me anymore. And he demands that the king in Sicily turn over the fugitive. But first, this king offers Minos to take a bath. I don't really know why. This seems kind of out of the blue for me, but I don't know. Maybe it's an ancient hospitality thing. But depending on the version of the story, King Minos takes a bath. And it's either the king of Sicily's daughter or Daedalus himself who pours boiling water on Minos and kills him. After King Minos dies, I think to most accounts, Daedalus is able to live quote-unquote happily ever after, or at least whatever version of that is possible in these kinds of stories. He's able to reestablish his architecture mastermind practice, I even think remarry and have other children in Sicily. Now, when I'm telling this story, I'm not trying to say, oh, just trust the universe, it all works out for the best. I wouldn't call this an example of all's well that ends well. On the contrary, I think Daedalus' struggles are real, and whatever success he gains comes at the cost of being haunted by death the rest of his life. But when I step back and I think about the whole arc of this character, Daedalus, who is inside me and outside me, who lived before me and will live after me in myth and story, I suppose, I assume. I think of how the images and metaphors in the story provide solutions to the very problems they pose. For example, when I consider the image of the labyrinth Daedalus built, it's so convoluted that you can get lost inside trying to fight your own demons, destroy your own monsters, or in my case, look so far into your own navel you can't see the light of day. Now in the story, to get out of that self-absorbed tunnel vision, the next image we encounter is that of flight. Daedalus and Icarus on wings, soaring away from the isolated tower, being able to have an elevated perspective. So when I need to get out of my own inner labyrinth, I think, how can I take the bird's eye view here? What is the bigger story? How is this just not my labyrinth, but a labyrinth, a human situation? I think of the ending too, and different people have commented on this. It's not my original thought. That the image of the spiral shell is an echo of the image of the labyrinth, with its winding recursive path to the center. I think in some way, the problems that we have earlier in our life can return to us later, but in smaller and more subtle forms. So instead of having this huge structure that a person can get lost inside with this hideous, monstrous creature, we're presented with something on a smaller scale, but a task that's no less complicated and intricate. I think, or at least I hope, that life can be like that too sometimes. We can find ourselves confronting the same issues in a different way, but hopefully with more mastery and maturity. And the last thing I'll comment on is the animal imagery that I've been thinking a lot about lately. And we go from this massive bull, the first one in the story is majestic and the second one is monstrous, from the soaring bird to the humble ant, this tiny little animal that knows how to work with others, unassuming and diligent, walking through, following the trail of honey through the shell, encapsulated in something so much bigger than itself. But the path itself is sweet. And that's how I feel about the work. The work itself is its own reward. And I think of myself following the trail of honey to the center. So now it's time to end the episode. And I'm not sure where we are in the labyrinth. If any of these ideas became clearer or only more complex, if we ever made it to the center, or if we're already on our way out. But either way, thank you for listening and accompanying me on the journey.